Are you ready for some Belle De Jour, beauty of the day? Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. I'm continuing my masculine feminine energies film breakdown series with a highly requested film, Belle De Jour. This movie was actually highly requested after I did my recent Brigitte Bardot breakdown of And God Created Woman. And so many people wanted me to break down Belle De Jour. I was a little leery about doing two French films, and then technically last week was sort of a semi-French film. So it's like February is just, the French are known for romance, so there you go. If you're not familiar with what I mean by masculine and feminine energies, I talk about this in a lot of my videos, but a brief summary: masculine and feminine energies are energies that live within all of us. We all contain both energies, but we all have a core energy. That's the energy we are most ourselves in. And we can be in wounded or healed versions of either of these energies. These energies often link up to our gender, but they don't have to. So Belle De Jour is a French film, so I highly suggest you watching it with subtitles if you don't speak French, like me. I'm very American, so I don't know if I'll be able to say some of the names in this film. I might butcher some of the French words, but what can I say? I'm from New England. You're lucky I pronounce my R's. Belle De Jour is probably the most iconic French film as far as Americans are concerned. And there are a lot of amazing aspects to it, just from a film perspective. It was actually done in the late 60s. Catherine Deneuve is, of course, gorgeous. I mean, most of the people in this film are gorgeous. The fashion in it, to me, is iconic. Like, just the everyday fashion is really beautiful. It's very 60s, but it's also very timeless, and it's like the epitome of French fashion to me. And the lingerie fashion in this is just unbelievable. So some really iconic fashion looks, so I would watch this movie for the fashion alone. I will admit this film was a little hard to follow. Now, if you don't speak French, I highly recommend you watching it with the subtitles. But even then, it's very artsy. French cinema tends to be a lot more sort of artsy, and in most of this film you don't really know what's fully fantasy and what's fully reality. You kind of get the impression that you know, but I don't know. Do you ever really know what's fantasy and what's reality? You could probably say that about everyday life, I suppose, but yeah. So this movie follows Séverine, I believe that's how you say her name, played by Catherine Deneuve, who's the iconic, gorgeous French actress. And Séverine is your typical, she's what today we would think of as a desperate housewife. She is a doctor's wife. She's very prim, she's very proper, she's a good girl. I'm actually gonna do a video on sort of good girl, bad girl phenomenon, and that should be up soon, so stay tuned for that. But yeah, she is the epitome of the good girl. She's very pristine. Her whole look is very like untouched. She has this air of like perfection about her. And her husband, who's a very handsome man, he seems like a really grounded, stable man, Pierre, who's a doctor, very intelligent, and he obviously loves Séverine, but he treats her like she's a good girl, and like he treats her with kid gloves. And they're newlyweds, but she is very much closed off to sex. You kind of get the impression, I think, that they've never had sexual interactions. You know, he's being very patient with her, and she is totally blocked off from the sexual aspect of her life. She's like unable to have sex with her husband. She starts fantasizing, and that's where things get interesting. In fact, the opening scene is the fantasy, and in this particular film, as opposed to breaking down specific relationships as much, I want to take this opportunity to talk about feminine sexual fantasies, because that's what this movie really is, a feminine sexual fantasy. I want to make a few things very clear before I start, just to make sure we're all on the same page about this. First of all, consent is very important. I don't want anything that I say in this breakdown to imply that consent is not of the utmost importance. So I want to make sure that's very, very clear. Consent is always key in any type of situation. The second one is, I don't want anybody to think that this video is implying anything about any kind of sexual trauma victims. I don't ever believe a woman is asking for it. I don't want to imply at all that women are like want to be sexually assaulted. Like, I don't want any, and I understand that some of these topics, particularly in this movie, as much as this movie is not that graphic really, especially by today's standards, it could be triggering for some, and I just want to make sure that this is abundantly clear from where I'm coming from when I talk about these things, because I do believe that these topics for some people could be very sensitive, so I want to be very, very mindful of that. Consent and you know, not implying that any woman is actually looking to be a victim in reality, right? So we're talking about feminine sexual fantasies in this. We're not talking about things that women actually want done to them. Some do, but we're not, like, that's where consent is super, super important. So I just want to make sure that's very clear before we get started. In this movie, Severine basically is having these really erotic fantasies, and they're primarily of submission. And when we think of, you know, sort of the BDSM world, the kink world, and I mean, there's lots of areas to that. I'm not an expert on BDSM and kink by any means. I've just done some research about it, but I'm not like an expert in that area. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that have way more knowledge and definitely have more experience in this than I do. So the idea of dominance and submission are very much masculine and feminine ideas, right? The dominant being the masculine energy and the submissive being the feminine energy. Now again, like I said earlier, this stuff does not have to link up with gender. So this is not saying that men have to be dominant and women have to be submissive. That's not what this is saying at all. There's plenty of situations where people like to switch when it comes to fantasy play and things like that. But the energy of dominance is masculine energy. The energy of submission is feminine energy. So it's very common for women in their feminine to have, well, first of all, it's very common for feminine beings, people who primarily identify as feminine, to have very, very dark fantasies. That's totally common. So if you're a woman out there, I just want to say, if you're a woman out there and you have really dark sexual fantasies, there is nothing wrong with you. You are 100% normal. Like, this is not about shaming anybody. Now, if you have dominant fantasies, you're a feminine being, there's no shame on that either. None of this is about shame. But in this particular film, Severine is really feeling like she needs to be the good girl, and she's really not comfortable fully embracing her sexuality. And very often, women in that situation who are not totally comfortable with their sexuality, but like want to have that part of their life, will very often start fantasizing about situations where they are forced into their sexual energy. It's really the psyche telling you that you want something, but you're afraid of it. So it's the idea that, like, well, if someone forces me into this, then I don't have any choice. When in reality, this is just a fantasy. In a fantasy, you always consent, right? And you could also say that this is not just being forced into submission, but being forced into really being in your feminine energy. It's having the masculine energy really, like, take charge and take control. And that's not at all to say that women actually want to be forced. That's where the consent part is super important. But it is a matter of needing that masculine energy to take charge, because the person themselves, the feminine being themselves, is having a hard time fully submitting to or relaxing into or being fully comfortable in that sexual energy. And if you think about it, right, in fantasies, there's always consent. Like, consent's implied in a fantasy, even if it's a fantasy about lack of consent, or even if it's a fantasy about that. It's all, like, it's your head, it's your mind, like, it's your brain, it's your, so like fantasies are always safe, right? Because you can stop them at any point, right? If at any point you're like, nope, don't want to do this, you can stop it, because there's no other person involved in this. It's literally all just fantasy. So you can let your fantasies go as far as you want. And for most feminine beings, and there obviously are women out there who live out their fantasies, more power to you, like, no shame on your game, really. But for most women, they're never going to feel fully safe enough to really fully drop into some of their really darkest sexual fantasies. So many of these fantasies only exist in the mind, but they're a way of putting on a persona or being in an energy that you may not fully allow yourself in. So like, if you're a woman who is not comfortable, like, fully dropping into a certain aspect even of your feminine energy, you're likely going to fantasize about being forced into that aspect of your feminine energy, because then it's kind of not your fault, so to speak, in your fantasy speaking, all right? And this is all in your mind, mind you. So if you're a woman who has not been able to fully express herself sexually or isn't comfortable with that aspect of it, you can very often have these fantasies about being forced into it. And Severine has a lot of fantasies about being tied up, you know, not really having a choice, being, you know, beaten, humiliated, things like that, all in this fantasy life. Her husband, while he is a very grounded, stable man, is not bringing the aggressive side that she needs in order to feel like she can relax and fully submit. Now granted, she's not communicating that to him. You know, she's just saying, oh, this is me, this is my problem, and he's like, okay, I'm gonna be patient, I'm gonna be, and he's being a good guy. I mean, like, there's no criticism of him.
À quoi penses-tu, Séverine? À quoi penses-tu?
Je pensais à toi. À nous deux. Non, je t'en prie.
Repose-toi. Bonsoir.
Pierre,
Oui,
je te demande pardon. Tu es si bon, si indulgent, mais je...
c'est rien. Dors.
She's not communicating to him what she needs, and he's sexually at least being a bit passive in his approach to her, and they're not coming together. There's a disconnect there. So she's living these things out in her head. So Séverine is, again, she's always seen as the good girl in her social circles, and she finds out about this brothel, and she starts working as a high-priced prostitute. Again, it's like, is this fantasy? Is it reality? How, you know, where's the line going here? But she shows up and starts working at this place, and she's very hesitant at first because, you know, again, this is way outside of her comfort zone. But it's almost as if, well, she can't do this with her husband because she's supposed to be perfect for her husband. When she does this and she goes and does this, it's kind of like living out her fantasy in reality, but she's a different person, right? She doesn't even go by her real name. She goes by Belle De Jour because she's only there during the day because she can only be there when her husband's at work. I'm not implying that any of this is the right way to do things, okay? Like, I'm not implying that you know, lonely housewives should go off and become hookers in order to, you know, get their sexual needs met. Like, none of this is something that I'm implying should happen. I'm just talking about the energies behind this. This film is obviously a massive extreme example of this stuff, although in reality there are a lot of women out there who are not getting their sexual needs met, so their husbands aren't getting their sexual needs met because neither one of them is really comfortable actually telling the other one what it is that they need from each other. So it is common for people to go look for those energies somewhere else. And if you notice that Belle De Jour, when she has a few interactions with some of the men that she meets in this brothel, you know, the first guy is very kind of he's silly, playful, fun-loving. I would consider him to be a little bit more in his feminine energy, you know, in that kind of like, you know, I'm a fun guy, I'm a playful guy. And then he starts to get really aggressive with Belle De Jour. It does appear like this is more what she wants, is someone who will be more aggressive with her. And again, I am not at all justifying any kind of, like, you know, force or violence or anything. But this was kind of something that she really was wanting. I mean, it's not like, oh, she was asking for it. Like, this is like she wanted this. She just wasn't fully sure she wanted it yet. Like, to make this fantasy into a reality was still hesitant for her. She ends up in another situation with a man who, which is an interesting dynamic, who is a, they say he's a really well-known doctor. Like, he's very high-powered. He does all these big surgeries, and he's this big, important person. And, you know, the other women in the brothel are basically like, oh, if all men could be like him, because he's very submissive, and you find that out very soon. He wants to be dominated.
La marquise m'a fait appeler.
Oui.
Madame la marquise n'est pas satisfaite de mon service?
Eh bien, non, en effet. Non.
Madame Anaïs.
Oui, voilà.
Vous seriez plus à votre place à la cuisine, mademoiselle. Reprenez-la, elle ne vaut rien. Envoyez-moi Charlotte, vite.
So Belle De Jour is very uncomfortable around this. You know, she really doesn't understand why he would want to be submissive or humiliated or anything, which is ironic because she's been fantasizing about that.
Crachez, piétinez-moi la figure.
Espèce de saligo, vieux cochon, je vais vous apprendre, moi.
Puisque je vous dis que je vous aime, Madame la marquise,
Venez. Il y a du monde. Alors, vous avez bien vu? Qu'est-ce que vous en dites?
Comment peut-on descendre aussi bas? Vous avez sans doute l'habitude, mais moi, ça me répugne.
But it's repelling her because she's so craving that really like dominant male. Like she's craving to be the submissive. So she is judging this man for wanting to be more submissive because that's not what she's craving. And, you know, she's not in this for the money. Some of these girls are in this for the money, so a man who might be less work would seem appealing, or to switch up energies or something, because they're in this for the money. They're more disconnected from it sexually. Whereas Belle De Jour is not doing this for the money. She doesn't need the money. She lives a very wealthy lifestyle with her doctor husband. She's doing this for the sexual satisfaction, and he's not a good match for her sexually. Now, this man comes in who, it's really, I tried looking up what he was, like what the story was behind this particular character. A very large man, and he has this box. I've looked up in a few places, and I still am not totally clear as to what people think was in the box, but he's obviously a very dominant male. The other girls are kind of like no, like they're freaked out by what it is that he's, you never find out officially what he's asking from them, but they're just freaked out. And you notice Belle De Jour is immediately softer. She's immediately more feminine. She's more relaxed, and she's very turned on by this man, which goes to show how strong that energy can be. She didn't know this guy. She didn't know much about this guy at all, and she just immediately felt this want and desire to submit to him. And they even say at one point like that he was kind of scary, and I'd be scared of him too, and you find out that she wanted that, like she was craving that from him. And to see that shift in her from like being very hesitant and very reserved to then like, oh my god, now she has this like this dominant male that just allows her to just actually enjoy herself in that way, as if like that's what she was craving. And all the other women are like totally freaked out by how frightening this guy is to them, and she's just totally sunken into it. And that's the moment that she really shifts into being comfortable with her sexual energy.
Et celle-là, ça irait?
Yaxım körkümç, çamak sen ne kadar okno bi çamak. Oy, xamay baktım ben, qoğusum mukur. Oy, hayır, iyiyim körküm köyüm bədim çam, kanayın xonqi kö. Hayatan çamak sen ne kadar okunca no bi. Şağa çamak çam mukurik dolagat, açı bayılcana çi. Okçıkno bi çamak, okçıkno. Okno çamak, okçıkno.
Moi aussi, cet homme-là, il me ferait peur. Des fois, ça doit être pénible tout de même.
Qu'est-ce que tu en sais, Palace?
And her husband starts noticing that she is, her energy's changed. She's more relaxed. She's got a slightly different vibe to her. She's more smiley and playful. Of course, he doesn't know that that's why she's she's feeling that way.
Comme tu as changé. Je te reconnais pas. Ça me fait tellement plaisir de te voir sourire.
Je me sens beaucoup mieux, c'est vrai.
Je t'ai jamais vu comme ça. Si seulement...
Quoi?
Oh, rien. Si seulement un jour tu m'annonçais une grande nouvelle.
Mais de quoi parles-tu?
Mais tu le sais bien. Ce que je souhaite par-dessus tout, un enfant.
But it goes to show you, when a woman is feeling really sexually satisfied, she glows. You know, I mean, there's a real shift in just everyday life. Everyday life is just more vibrant when a woman is connected to her sexual energy. Sexual energy and feminine energy are very, very, they're really the same thing, you know what I mean? And so, you know, she's now feeling the joys and pleasures of life. She's less reserved, and you know, her husband even is noticing. He doesn't really know why, but he's noticing. Men are approaching her on the street. You know, she just has a different air about her now that she's really gone into her sexual energy. Now, she ends up in a situation with this man who we find out is a criminal. He's very sketchy. He's very dangerous. He's the bad boy. And he essentially falls in love with Belle De Jour and becomes obsessed with her. And Belle De Jour starts feeling like she wants to leave this lifestyle and just be with her husband, and she's decided that she kind of, you know, has gotten what she needed from this and that she really wants to fully be with her husband. And of course this bad boy decides he's not gonna let that happen, and so chaos ensues. It's kind of a confusing film towards the end, I will admit. I've seen this several times and I'm still kind of like, what? I don't know. Anyway, but I think it goes to show this line of like, she had the husband who was for all intents and purposes a great man. Like, he was a great man. He just didn't have that aggressive side to him. He didn't have that aggressive dominant side to him. There was nothing wrong with his stability, his desire to be a provider. He was a true gentleman. There was nothing wrong with that. It was just he wasn't able to step into that masculine aggression that his wife was desiring. And I think that's one of the reasons why women often sort of leave the good guy for the bad boy, is because they seek that energy in them, and they don't necessarily like all the other stuff that comes along with the bad boy stuff, the dangerous lifestyle, the, you know, the constant adrenaline, which can sometimes be exciting, but for most people that's gonna wear in your nervous system real quick. But it becomes that aggressive energy that a lot of women are craving from if they have a partner who's a little bit more of like the nice guy. I've touched about this in my masculine archetypes video about the concept of how, like, you know, sort of the good guy and the bad boy individually are never going to fully satisfy the feminine, because she needs the grounded stableness of the nice guy, and she needs that sort of powerful aggressive energy of the bad boy. And so neither one is really going to fully satisfy her. She needs something that is a combination of the both in order to really sink into her own feminine energy. I will say in this, there's a character in this, her name begins with an M. I don't know how to pronounce it because it's French. She's like reddish hair. She's one of the girls in the brothel. She, for me, even though she's not crucial to the story, I honestly, I've had her on vision boards and stuff. Like, her energy, like her like sexual energy vibe, one of my favorites. I think she's iconic. She's kind of got like that kind of like playful but smoldering kind of French vibe. I just love her. I'm not exactly sure how you pronounce her name. It begins with an M though. And she has a pink lingerie set, like when you meet her early on in the brothel. I'm like, that's hot. Anyway.
Ah, moi, si je reste bredouille un soir, je peux toujours courir pour m'endormir après. Oh,
Il est amusant, il vient toujours avec des trucs nouveaux.
So yeah, this film is very much kind of like a precursor to like the Desperate Housewives idea of these women who feel like they need to have this like perfection or this air of perfection around them, and then they end up seeking these sort of sexual fantasies in other areas. And again, none of this is to imply that consent is not of utmost importance. It totally is. And also not implying that women are actually seeking to be victims in any way. This is all about fantasy, and it's all about fantasy play. It's about this concept that oftentimes when women feel like they need to be perfect or they need to be the good girl, oftentimes they start to fantasize about being forced into connecting with their sexuality because they're just not comfortable doing it on their own. And not that they actually want to be forced into it, but that they desire a partner who can take charge and kind of lead them into it, because masculine energy is a leading energy. It's about leadership, and many times women are seeking a man to lead them into submitting into their sexual energy. And again, these are extreme cases. This film is obviously an extreme example. I'm not implying that anything that she did was correct. I mean, obviously becoming a high-class prostitute while your husband is at work, probably not the best solution for your marriage. But I do think this film is an extreme example of something that happens in a lot of long-term relationships. If you don't have communication between both parties as to what they're really desiring, it can be really easy to just sort of push some of these things under the rug and not actually sharing your fantasies with your partner. Your partner can't necessarily give you what they don't know that you need. So having that kind of open communication can be so important so that you don't end up going off and becoming a prostitute. I don't know. She was a pretty glamorous prostitute, I gotta say, so there you go. And I also want to make sure I'm very clear. I'm not shaming sex workers by any means. I mean, I question people who are in committed long-term relationships who are doing these things behind their partner's back. I don't think that's necessarily healthy, but I'm not shaming sex work in any way. That's not what any of this is. I'm literally just talking about the film and sexual fantasies. You do you. Or somebody else, I guess. Okay, I need to stop. So yeah, Belle De Jour is an iconic film. If you don't speak French, totally watch it with the subtitles. In the same way that And God Created Woman is the type of film where it's like, it's not super wordy, so it's not like you're going to be constantly reading the subtitles. So if you're like afraid of films with subtitles, don't be. It's not like there's a lot of words. A lot of this is very cinematic. So yeah, I think it's a really beautiful film. Could be triggering for some, so just a fair warning, but it's not explicit. In fact, compared to what you see nowadays, it's pretty tame. There's a little bit of nudity, but not much. This film was requested. I love your requests. I actually have a list that I am going through. So if you have already requested a film, trust me, it is on the list. And if you have any other film requests, let me know. I'll add them to the list because I love to break down requested films. So if you have any other film requests or topics you'd like me to talk about, let me know. Leave a comment in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you. I love your suggestions. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a big thumbs up and be sure you subscribe to my channel. If you want to connect to your feminine energy and really learn how to embrace your femininity, I have an online course. Details are in the description box below, along with links to all my social media accounts. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.